So in that way, we've had a look last time around that there are different types, different flavors of agile methods like RAD, rapid application, Lean, extreme programming, Kanban, and Scrum. And then we've had a look at MDE. We did have a look at FDD, feature-driven development, DDD, behavior-driven development. There's so many other DDD, domain-driven design. There are all of these different flavors of agile methods, but these are all good for product design. Just if you have got one product or one small team, individual team of about 5 to 10 people, then these are the best methods available. If you've got any more than that, then it gets difficult. So that's where the scaled agile frameworks would come in, right? So we've got this DSDM, which is good, again, dynamic systems development method or model, which is good for like, teams, multiple teams or bigger team size of 100 people, 200, you can use it. And same with AUP or even SAFE, SAFE, Scaled Agile Framework. These are all good for the scaled, or even if you want to really scale it up and have multiple teams and working in tandem, they're really good. And in fact, even Scrum also has got something called as Nexus or Less or Scrum of Scrums. All of these are different ways of trying to scale up the team, the adoption of agile methods from one small team to you've got multiple teams. So where does Kanban really fit in? So Kanban is actually brilliant when it comes to this because it can work really well with Scrum, with TDD, with XP, with Lean, pretty much every other agile method. In fact, it is widely used in SAFE as well, SAFE, DSDM. It really is like a beautiful methodology that fits in well with other methods that you use into your, in terms of your product development, process improvement. So it is that way very amenable, very it fits in flexibly into that framework, whatever you're trying to use. So I would strongly suggest using Kanban in whatever way you try and use. So let's have a look at the difference between Scrum and Kanban quickly, because I understand you're running out of time. So you've got a Scrum board is what we call here, used in a Scrum project, which has got to do, ongoing, done. The same thing with a Kanban board as well, to do, ongoing. So what's the difference? Kanban board says to you that you have got to have rows and columns, you've got to track the items, you've got to flow. And similarly, we've got what we call a Scrum board in a Scrum project. And it has potentially pretty much the same things. So there's not much of a real difference between these in that sense, in terms of the workflows. In fact, Scrum adopted Kanban's approach into its own, and that's how the work is tracked. But there's a huge set of difference when it comes to the Scrum process or the Kanban process itself. Or even the mindset in terms of how you would use potentially. So Scrum process, as you know, we've got iterations, we've got releases, sprint backlogs, and the product backlog, user stories, or different items there. And they go through this, and we've got the sprint execution, where you've got 2 to 4 weeks, then you do the sprint planning, sprint execution, and then sprint review, sprint retrospective. So this is the prescribed way for Scrum. You can't say that I don't follow all these, but I will still use Scrum. Then that is not Scrum, because you have to follow this. And then you've got the 3 roles there: the product owner, Scrum master, and the Scrum development team. You have to have the structure like that. You can't, otherwise you can't say, no, I'm still following Scrum. No, it's not accepted. So Scrum is flexible, but at the same time, it is a bit watertight in that sense. It's still prescriptive about the roles, about how you call the events, how you structure the plan and arrange the meetings. All of that, it's still, there is some kind of a structure and a method to the madness. Whereas when it comes to Kanban, there's no specific role, there's no set of structures, templates, techniques that you need to use. So a quick look at this would actually give you the main differences, right? So Scrum actually gives you a time-boxed aspect of, so you're time-boxing within that particular iteration of 2 to 4 weeks, you must deliver this. That's what we're trying to do within a sprint, right? A sprint is basically a time box. Whereas in Kanban, there's no such concept. There's no such thing as a time box. It doesn't believe in that. But it can actually be based on the events, or whenever the work comes in, it will take it. So it can be driven by the triggers of when the work comes in, or based on some regular periodic events, going to the customers, asking them for their customer satisfaction survey. And that could actually give you a lot of work in terms of where the problems are. So you work on those, right? So that could be an event. That could be something which is external. And And that's not a time box. There's no specific time limit when you need to complete those defects or the suggestions coming in from the customer survey, because that again is you prioritize them and you put it into the Scrum's backlog, the sprint backlog. And then the Scrum actually prescribes, and you must have 3 roles within your team. So you have got product owner, Scrum master, and the development team. Whereas in Kanban, there's no such thing as a product owner or a development team. It is flexible on that. You can, in fact, you can use the same roles that you have for Scrum into Kanban as well. That's not a problem. And same with Safe. If you're using Safe, Safe has got different roles, so you can still use Kanban in the Safe's roles as well. So it is pretty flexible on that front. And then the burn down chart is a very popular tool. It is what is prescribed by Scrum to use to manage, control the work that is, or the effort that is actually being spent on the on a particular sprint within the Scrum process. Whereas here, we've actually had a look at that, right? The cumulative flow diagram is what is suggested by Kanban. So that's different from the burn down chart. And then the sprint backlog is actually kind of reset. It is cleared and it resets every sprint. So every sprint has got a new sprint backlog. It cannot be the same. Perhaps you're doing the same pieces of work, you're changing, you're not able to update, but still you go through the whole process of sprint planning, of pulling the items from the product backlog into the sprint backlog, do a sprint planning, and then do the estimation, and then commit to the sprint backlog, and then start the sprint execution. So that way you're actually kind of going through the whole loop of going through the sprint backlog creation and backlog execution completion with every sprint. Whereas with Kanban, it's not the case. You have the Kanban board all the way through, right? So what changes is perhaps if items are moved, they keep moving from one column to another column. Once they're deployed, for example, perhaps you can try and remove that, because you've achieved that it's not required to be tracked anymore. But for example, if a shopping cart is done, it's deployed, and you think that that is all complete, it doesn't mean you take it off the board, because potentially there could be changes coming in the shopping cart in terms of the supplier, the vendor that you choose, or the way that you deal with the shopping cart or the payment or something like that. So you can still go back to the column number 1. So with Kanban, it's persistent. The board is persisting across the sprints. So you can actually get to see the flow of work across the sprints from sprint 1 all the way through to sprint 100, if required. Of course, it is not always the case. And then the items must be broken down, estimated in Scrum. It's always the case, right? So we've actually looked at it, how you try and split the epics into stories, and using the invest principle, make sure that it's actually estimatable. We do estimation, the size estimation, the relative estimation of t-shirt sizing, or we do the planning poker. We assign the story points. Is it 3 points? Is it 5 or 8 or whatever, 13? And then we'll actually come up with a list of, okay, these are the kind of stories that can be done in this sprint based on the sprint capacity and the velocity, team velocity. Whereas in Kanban, there's no such rule. There's no such way to estimate the size, because you're not trying to do the estimation. There are no estimation techniques that Kanban prescribes. But we can try and use other methods where you have Kanban implemented within Scrum, and you're trying to use user stories, which is again a different technique altogether. It's not a Scrum technique. So that way it is, Agile is pretty flexible on that. You can still use multiple methods, but you need to take the best of those. You can't just say that I'm following Scrum, but I don't want to follow roles because I want to follow Kanban in that way. It still works, but then is it the most efficient way? It's not. So try and mix things and use the best practices, not the worst practices, and try and not use the loopholes from the other methodologies. That's the whole idea. And then, as we discussed, I think we discussed this at length in the last few sessions about how we move the stories across the boards in a Scrum project. So the Scrum team works, and the product owner helps the Scrum team, and the Scrum master would help, again, assist and enable the Scrum teams to update the stories. They move the stories and the tasks from one column to another column within the board. And this is what would be used in Jira or Trello.